are still begging European Union, USA, Japan, and so forth for help. No way, no one will help you unless they have to get in some kind of concession and, of course, on bargaining, on principle. That's why African Union leadership needs a strong, a charismatic person. Besides the academic knowledge and competency and language and geography and politics and international relations, the gentleman, the incumbent candidate should have the conviction and should have the charisma that he can impose. African leadership is so far weak, and therefore we have to impose our view. And of course, this is not only word, but on the ground, we should elect a person who is able to really impose African view and to speak out the minds, of African people in international arenas. That's why I feel very sorry that, unfortunately, I noticed that for the last couple of years and so, African Union went into some kind of bargaining and negotiation to secure their own budget, and this is completely wrong. And of course, they were at the mercy of European Union financing scheme, and it gives the European Union an opportunity to impose, to interfere, and to intervene in African internal affairs. So we have now for contender, as we said it already clearly. But I won't say who will be elected. But if we consider each candidate's country, we have one from Kenya, one from Mauritius, one from, of course, Comoros, and the other one from Djibouti. I think I'm not despising anyone, but these countries, Djibouti, Comoros, and Mauritius, on the political card, they are not so strong as the case of Kenya, and maybe and particularly Raila Odinga, the leader of opposition in Kenya, who couldn't get power in Kenya for so many times. I hope that he was not kicked out of domestic affairs in Kenya to get him rid of Kenyan domestics and send him to Addis Ababa. But frankly, I don't know. Neither all of people candidates don't know them. But I predict that they have to understand and to bear in mind they have a lot of huge challenge to impose at least African Union to be revisited and gain its dignity, its sovereignty, and financial independence. If we cannot secure that, again, we will succumb to another situation of vulnerability, concession, and so forth. So, to sum up, African Union needs a strong leader with charisma, with knowledge, enough knowledge in politics, speaks more than one language or two languages, and know very well the challenge that faces the continent.
Of course, and the goal is to have the agenda of the continent as a major priority. Just to note that when Raila Odinga was addressing the audience when unveiling his political agenda for the African Union Commission, he noted that it was high time Africa moves or takes this slogan, which are very, appealing to ensuring that that leads to strategic implementation of reforms across the African continent. It's about the Africa we want. And now, coming back to you, Professor MONDA, let's try to analyze the past leaders who have been at the helm of the African Union Commission, and of course see what the stakes are for these incoming candidates that will maybe emerge victorious at the elections which are built for 2025. What leadership structure can they actually adopt?
I think that the new leader or whoever takes over the commission will really need to be a consensus builder. They will need to have very personal relationships or networks with a lot of African leaders. I think they will need to be able to bridge the traditional idiosyncratic, regional, linguistic and political rivalries between and within African states. So to your question again, whoever is the next leader will need, for example, to bridge that gap between Francophone Africa and Anglophone Africa, which, played out last time when we had Musa Faki run against Amina Mohammed, from Kenya, and Musa Faki from Chad. There's a huge divide there, and there seems to also be a similar divide coming up with the upcoming election, with a candidate from Djibouti, French-speaking Africa, and Raila Odinga from Anglophone Africa. Most of the countries that have endorsed Raila Odinga, apart from Algeria, that endorsed him, all of the rest are from Anglophone Africa. Yeah. So I think that's a challenge, the linguistic divide. I think the geographic divide, Madam Chair, is something we really need to seriously consider, because historically, the West has always divided Africa between the North Africa, and the South, meaning Sub-Saharan Africa. The more broadly Arab-speaking North, and the more Christian slash the more Christian-speaking South. So there's that traditional North-South divide. And why do I say that? Because Africa we've not really come very forcefully around this question of Palestine. I think it's only South Africa which has really been very vocal around some of the atrocities of the right-wing Israeli government against the Palestinians, and some of the instabilities in the Middle East. And I think most African countries, or all African countries, as members of the Global South, and past AU declarations of granting the PLO observer status within the AU, of denying Israel observer status because of some of the atrocities in the Middle East. I think that geographic divide really needs to be bridged between the North Africa and the South, in terms of how Africa then speaks around these core global foreign policy questions, particularly, on the Middle East. And then I think the other challenge that you mentioned, I think that the new chairperson would really need to address is, the youth dividend.
Sure.
Over 60% of the continent's 1.2 billion people are youth below the age of 25. And these are, young people that feel frustrated, that feel marginalized, that feel unrepresented within their own countries, and within the priorities, for example, of NEPAD, New Partnership for Africa's Development, in terms of addressing their core concerns. And I think this is then exemplified when we see, a lot of our young people dying, trying to cross the Red Sea to get to Arabia to find better opportunities, or to cross the Mediterranean from North Africa. A lot of migrants from Sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa, right, trying to get to Europe, and dying, a lot of these young people dying in large numbers. Yeah. I think that's also a huge question. But I think finally, the chair should also be thinking about questions of transparency and fairness in terms of global trade, and how that affects the continent, right? Africa we have less than 3% of the global trade, and this cannot continue. And simply because in a lot of cases, the structures of global trade and commerce are stacked against Africa developing, in terms of tariffs against African commodities that are exported to either Europe or the US, around the transfer of technology, but also around the investment that's brought on the continent, Madam Chair, right? This idea that a lot of the industries are still very extractive. We don't have technology being shared. We have the abuse of labor in many African countries with very exploitative corporate interests. So I think in terms of the linguistic question, the geographic divides, the policies on trade, I think these will be big areas that the new chair will really need to address.
Indeed, that is why we said the stakes are really high, and of course, is the scope actually available for this incoming chair to capitalize on, to meet, of course, the objectives which you just highlighted and which Professor LAEED highlighted earlier on. And still in the same perspective, coming back to you, Professor LAEED, I quite remember some time ago when Musa Faki Mahamat was actually addressing the trends across the global world, and particularly on Africa. He noted that multilateralism has greatly increased in the 21st century, and now Africa is cognizant of these, changing times, but also called on major stakeholders across the continent, especially political stakeholders, to capitalize on this multilateralism to increase Africa's standing or Africa's voice at the international level. Now, the question which we need to answer at this particular moment, Professor LAEED, is: do you think, even with the continent already aware of that the scope is high as far as multilateralism is concerned in Africa, do you think the available scope is already there for leaders to capitalize and redefine Africa's trajectory? And if no, what are some of those impediments and, of course, recommendations that needs to be taken practically to, salvage the situation?
Yes, you are completely, and you are right to affirm that. But my view is that for sure we have a multiplicity of multilateral relations between Africa and so many countries. But my point is good to have this, of course. Then, of course, you are upgrading the position of Africa worldwide. But I think that the problem is not in the strategy. The problem is in the technicality. What I want to say by that, I don't want to see all 55 countries, their leader moving all together to, let's say, to Istanbul when it comes to relations between Turkey and African Union, or to Japan and to Tokyo, as happened last time about TICAD and all this and diplomatic position. I think we should give African Union leadership enough power, and they should speak on behalf of 55 countries. We have a strong leadership that I would give more impetus, more power, more responsibility to the leadership of African Union to speak on behalf of their members, and not to bring all together to Washington, to Paris, to Italy, and here and there. No, this is completely, unless the objective is not to promote the image, but to make tourism. And I'm sorry to say that. So but African Union, I would say the main representative of 55 countries, and they should be the only one who negotiate with countries, with the blocs and so forth. I don't want that to have all these big people, a big audience, mistreated in so many cases. And African Union should be present with its leadership, and maybe why not bring diplomats, not necessarily in the ranks of president of foreign minister. That should be clearly defined, because Western countries, if they are, whether Western countries or external countries like Japan, South Africa, South Korea, and Turkey, and so forth, when they meet all these people, for them it's an opportunity to engage in some kind of bilateral relation. Leave aside the bilateral relation, think about multilateral. African Union has the authority and the prevalence. That's what we should see. Afterwards, of course, and when we speak one voice, it is easy to reach a conclusive result. But coming all together in this, I would say, manner which is not really acceptable, which is not coherent, which is not harmonious for Africa, this is bad image. That's why, and more than that, African Union now, it has to stick out to impose its view in the world affairs, and of course from what is from the activities of many countries like the groups 10, which composed of Algeria, Sierra Leone, and so forth. They ask for at least two members, permanent member seat in the United Nations Security Council. So that's exactly what we should speak for and look for and defend. And I don't understand why we are still keeping asking for help, asking for assistance instead of talking of partnership. We should now value the concept of partnership, of cooperation, and not of assistance. And that this word should be removed. And likewise, I would like to say that African Union has the right, because why? Has the right to impose its view on the world. Why? Because it's a rich country. It's a rich continent, I would say. We are richest country, a continent in the world, with over 1,300,000,000 of inhabitants. Then, of course, with a particular youth and so forth. So I think we should have self-confidence. This is the problem: is that African Union don't have their self-confidence, and they continue to rely on other and foreign aid. This is completely wrong. This is very negative perception. So that's what we should reverse. We should revisit the relation between African Union and the outside world.
Absolutely, yeah. It's about time Africa stands intentional about defining its position in relation to the outside world. And while talking about the stance of the African Union, Professor LAEED, I would love to stay with you one more time. Let's try to look at some sort of, we just identified that multilateralism is increasing across Africa. We see every nation carving sphere of influence across Africa. And we also see that while this is happening, there is still a lot of divergence across the African continent. The last AU summit in Addis Ababa, that was 2023, we actually noted that a bulk of the session actually was about discussing the contestation between countries. We saw the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Rwanda, and even Ethiopia, and Ethiopia, Somalia, and Egypt, and other contestations which are now across the continent. So how can, under the banner of the African Union Commission and the upcoming chairperson, redefine Africa's diplomacy that will, solve this internal strife to be able to capitalize on the sphere or the scope of multipolarity on the continent for its good, attaining Agenda 2063?
Yes, okay, Clarice. What I would say, I think African Union in its organization and its structures, they have different commissions, and the main one is on Peace and Security Commission. Its business, its main business is to maintain peace and security in the whole continent. I think they have the structure, they have the policy, they have the philosophy. When we speak about security, we have the architecture, peace and security agenda, APSA, and we have also so many other instruments to impose. We have people, we have the leader of this, what we call wise man, who can be, so we have to the mediation process. You don't have to take to take side with one against the other. This commission, and of course those in charge of this commission, they should work together to help people getting together. I'm not being chauvinistic. I remembered when we have the Algerian head of commission, whether it was Lamamra or the other one who came after Mr. Shirdi, they have done a great job to at least to establish peace and security in many parts of Africa. Why? Because they have been proning an impartial view when it comes to the situation, when it comes to the conflict between, as we said, Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda, when it comes to Ethiopia and of course Egypt and Sudan regarding the dam construction and the reconstruction. So I think we have they have all the instruments. They have the policy. What is lacking is the willing and the responsibility of the leaders who are in charge of implementing this to get constructive approach and objective one, and not supporting one against the other. I am sorry to say there were so many cases, so many conflicts which were solved because of the special envoy of African Union in that part of Africa. And I am sorry, African Union has done nothing, and through the Commission of Peace and Security. Why didn't they activate the standby African force? Why did not? Why did they have to? Why have they let the French coming to Sahel 5,500 and other European forces? So we are lacking efficiency. We are lacking strength, and we don't activate, or maybe we are guided by external people who are dictated how to do. And that's why I think I am convinced that if Africans really are confident of their own potentiality, they could solve the problem. The last thing I want to say, if we speak about the case of Sahel, for instance, until now we have about 14 to 16 initiatives, which means we have 16 partners coming from all over the world. United Nations, African Union, of course. We have the Islamic Cooperation for Education, for Organization, Arab League. We have European Union. We have USA. We have so many other non-official entities coming in, and all of them are there not for the main reason of establishing peace, but for securing their own objective and interest. So time has come that Africa should unite behind strong leadership and stop the interference of foreign countries. Take the example of Western Sahara. Western Sahara, the case has been pending for 50 years exactly, and then some countries, take the example, and some countries sided with Morocco against the common sense, against the country which is member, against Western Sahara, which is a member of the Constitution Act of African Union 2002. So this is nonsensical. We should stick to values and to principles of African Union and of Pan-Africanism.
Indeed, putting the interest of Africa and Africans first. Professor MONDA, I will appreciate it if you also comment on this aspect. Of course, we just to tell our viewers that we wouldn't want to focus on the personalities of just on the personalities of the candidates contesting this post, but we also want to identify the stakes which lie ahead as we move toward the election date. We have seen we are still on the internal divergence in the continent and how it is already a great setback. How intentional can this, impending leaders be at the helm of the African Union Commission, the Secretariat of the AU, in resolving these very strong diplomatic feuds which are tearing the continent, undermining its political independence or sovereignty in taking continental decisions?
I think that's an important question, and it's a very difficult question. And I think Africa has so many conflicts. Every conflict has its own unique context. So the previous guest was speaking to, we have the long-standing challenge of Western Sahara, of the Polisario movement, in that region, and this tension between Morocco and Algeria around the question of Western Sahara, and the challenges around a plebiscite for the people of Western Sahara for their own self-determination, and how that will be dealt with. So I think that's one of our very sticky areas, which Morocco seems to, recently have been successful in getting many members of the AU to support its stance on Western Sahara, including including recently in Kenya with the switch of the recognition from Western Sahara to Morocco in terms of diplomatic recognition. We also see on that very same issue, Morocco mending its fences with the AU, because Morocco, stormed out of a lot of the AU structures because of its position on Western Sahara, the AU's position on Western Sahara. So that's a very difficult context, I think, for the next chairperson of the Africa Union Commission. But another context we can think about is in the situation in the DRC.
Absolutely.
Where again we have all these multiple regional and global players that have their hands into extraction of the rare minerals in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. So here we're thinking around the gold, the silver, the coltan, the titanium, the manganese, these very rare minerals. And it becomes even more challenging because countries like Rwanda have been backing proxies like the M23 in advancing their regional security and economic and political interests in the DRC. But the other challenge is that government in Kinshasa is too weak to fully assert its sovereignty over that region. And then we have the multiplicity of economies of violence that are being created within the Great Lakes region that make resolution of the problems in that area and in that context also very difficult. And I think the third and last example I'll give, in specifically to your question of some of the challenges for this this new leader and how they can deal with some of these regional rivalries and transnational rivalries. Sudan, very frankly, is faced with the serious threat of implosion. In other words, Darfur, the country is splitting into 3 different parts at this point. The central government in Khartoum has moved to Port Said. The rebels, the RSF rebels, continue to grow in strength. There seems to be an impasse in terms of the war between the 2 factions, and the war seems to continue forever. So Sudan, we're really at a precipice where you can have Sudan break up into 3 parts, with the Darfur region becoming its own independent country because the RSF and Hemedti has a lot of support in that area. The South Kordofan area breaking off, and then, General Burhan having his control over the Port Said area. So that's a real significant challenge. I think one other thing we must say is we have to also realize that the irony and the weakness of the African Union, because even within Ethiopia itself, there's a low-lying civil war with the Oromia in the south of Ethiopia. Yeah. We had the recent problems in Tigray. So even at the chair, the seat in Addis Ababa of the African Union, we have significant problems. And, I think it's fair for us to be honest and realistic about what the new chair of the African Union can do. I tend to see it more as continuity rather than change. And until Africa starts to develop strong economic institutions, strong political institutions, rather than strong men, I think these problems will continue for a long time to come.
And making it really problematic, will it be a continuation or will it be a drastic change for the betterment of the entire continent? Just to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, if you are just tuning in, you're on to Global Insight on For You Media Africa. And today, the African Union, Africa's #1 institutional bloc, is on the table while we are particularizing on the impending African Union Commission elections that will see a successor of Charles Musa Faki Mahamat come in. But now, what changes do we expect? What are the stakes for this new coming leader? And of course, is the scope, especially political scope, available for these candidates to actually harness for the betterment of the continent Africa? And it is here that we are going to go deeply again to understanding the challenges of what awaits these candidates. I will stay with you, Professor MONDA. Raila Odinga of Kenya is one of the candidates vying this very strategic position in Africa. While talking earlier on, Professor LAEED was, questioning the feasibility of the candidature of Raila Odinga, taking examples from his internal maneuver in the political life of Kenya. Now, let's, being a citizen from Kenya and a great analyst, what can we say are the prospects for Raila Odinga in leading at the continental level? Of course, the political race is living internally from Kenya to broaden the African continent.
So this is an interesting question you ask, because a lot of this politicking, the voting on the new chair, it's a lot of politics and a lot of diplomatic wheeling and dealing. So if we look back at the last elections for the last chair of the the AU Commission, Amina Mohamed was very much ahead at the initial round of voting. When you had the Senegalese candidate, you had Musa Faki and Amina Mohamed. She was well ahead. But the Chadian candidate, Musa Faki, was very adroit and skilled in terms of wheeling and dealing, and getting some consensus around his candidature. So even though Amina Mohamed had done more as a foreign minister in terms of leading major international diplomatic organizations, Musa Faki was more hands-on and practical and able to to wheel and deal and to bring consensus around his candidature, and to deny Amina Mohamed the seat, particularly when you looked at the results of the voting, where a lot of countries actually abstained from voting for Amina Mohammed, and that led to Musa Faki actually getting a majority of the votes in the final round. So I use the last elections to reflect then on these elections.
Sure.
Even though it might appear that Raila Odinga is at the forefront of winning, or the cusp of winning, this seat, the significant and troubling clouds for him, given the fact that it seems that a lot of his support is really based around, Anglophone Africa.
Sure.
South Africa and Nigeria, as the two superpowers, on the continent, have provided support for him. So there will definitely be a backlash from a lot of the countries, non-English speaking countries, that might feel that the seat should actually remain with a francophone speaking country, and that will be something to look at.
Yeah.
But I think in conclusion, I think I might also say the AU Executive Council is on record as saying that regionally, because previous seats have been held by Western, Central, and Southern African regions. Previous chairs have come from both regions. So the AU Executive Council is actually has been of the opinion that it's now Eastern Africa's turn, because all the other regions have had a chair. That is now Eastern Africa's turn to have a chair. It's only fair that that every region of the continent has has a chance to provide a chair for the AU. So it'll be interesting to see going forward how that how that plays out. But I think as of today, as we speak, I think Raila Odinga is definitely a front runner.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, it makes the whole situation quite interesting. And the continents continue to watch the involvement around the African Union. And if these, changes from to East Africa will actually bring some sort of changes, practical changes at the level of, continent project. Dr. Elijah ENOAKU just rejoined. Welcome, sir, and we again apologize for the interruption. We are looking at the feasibility of practical change coming to the African Union through the election of the new African Union Commission chair, and what impetus can these candidates, if elected, bring to the AUC and the AU as a whole in a moment of high multilateralism across the African continent. Professor MONDA just highlighted the peculiarity of the Kenyan candidate. Now, there seems to be some sort of debate already across the African continent, given the place of Djibouti and Kenya. It's noted that Mohamud Ali Yusuf is one of the contenders who is hailing from Djibouti, and Kenyan Raila Odinga, which is actually, bringing some sort of disparity and contestation regarding the position of East African bloc in, rallying behind a candidate. Dr. ENOAKU.
Clarissa, sorry for that disconnection, but I was trying to make a point before I went offline that if this is what Africa has to offer, then we are in for trouble. I don't have any problem with Kenya holding the African Union chairperson. I don't have any problem with English countries holding the presidency of this African Union. But is that all Africa has to offer? Is it Raila Odinga the only candidate that Kenya can offer? Aren't they energetic, forward-looking candidates with bright future who have the ideas to carry Africa forward? Is that the only person in Kenya that can represent Africa? To be honest with you, people like Raila Odinga, they are tired politicians, completely tired. They have no vision for Africa. I do not understand how a brilliant man like William Ruto, that I admire so well, will put a candidature like that one. I don't know if it's to pacify the opponents or the people on the other side, or is that what Kenya can afford at this time? Is that who Kenya can offer at this time? Even the whole of East African group, if you take people like Ari Kane, who is so forward-looking, who can stand toe-to-toe with the West, who can bring ideas when it comes to technology, security, education, food and nutrition, whatever it is that you call it. This woman has what it takes. People who have interacted even with the Western world, people who have been at the level of diplomacy, people who know what it takes to stand toe-to-toe with the Western world. Is that what Africa can afford at this time? What is the vision of Raoul Odinga for Africa? What has he been able to do for Kenya that we can say, if we put him at the helm of African Union, he can replicate? What has Raoul Odinga done? So, ladies and gentlemen, let us not chase after personalities here, or use political pacification as a tool to go to the African Union chairperson. It is wrong. Let's look at the young people. Julius Malema is from South Africa. We've seen what he went to the African Parliamentary Group. We see what he did within a short while. He shook the organization. He shook to the core. He brought changes. He forced his way, and we saw how things are changing. Those are the kind of leaders we should be looking for, not looking for politicians to go and sit there like Fakima was there. What did Fakima do? At the time of office, one of the things that African Union is supposed to do right now is to sit down and do an evaluation and say, okay, during the time of Fakima, or during this period from this time to time, this is what we did. This is where we failed. This is what we need to do to revamp our failures. But if the African Union follow the same pattern, the same channel, the same thing they've been doing over the years, that is not a forward-looking strategy. You need to re-evaluate where you failed. Look at the Agenda 2063. Just look at the pillars. Gigantic, from economy. One of the pillars there is talking about sending somebody to the moon, a satellite, that Africa should launch a satellite by 2063. Is it Raoul Odinga who's going to have that idea to carry Africa forward, to carry out such an initiative? Is that the person that's going to take us forward to that direction? Look at the issue of energy independence in Africa. Is it Raoul Odinga who is going to channel that aspect of Africa? Look at the aspect of technology. Is it Raoul Odinga in this dispensation who is going to carry Africa forward in terms of technology? Come on, ladies and gentlemen. If we are not serious in Africa, we just fold the office and call it something else, because this is not the way Africa should go. We need people with ideas, forward-looking people, people who can come in and shake the ground and shake the status quo. No people are going to continue to maintain the status quo. The status quo is not working. That's the point I'm trying to say. So whether it is Djibouti or it is Kenya, to me, it doesn't really matter that much, though. It doesn't really matter. We need somebody in there who can shake things up in this dispensation. In a couple of days on your show, we're talking about the polarism that is coming to the world. The world is no more a unipolar world. Russia is coming. All these other countries are coming in. Who is the statistician, the technocrat, that is going to take advantage of these opportunities that are opening up in the world to go toe-to-toe and say, we have this opportunity. Let's sit down and discuss as equal. Or we're going to have a bunch of 55 member states was from one country to the other, like my colleague from Algeria was saying, like students. They're moving from one country to the other, moving around. No strategy. No strategy. So the point I'm trying to make is, I don't really care if it is Djibouti, or it is Kenya, or it is Zimbabwe, or it is South African. To me, we need somebody who knows, who's a technocrat, who understand what it means to bring 55 member states. Now, a couple of days ago on your show, we're talking about the African Free Trade Agreement.
Sure.
You are talking about a 3.3 trillion economy that Africa has. And with that, when the African Free Trade Agreement was announced, we saw a lot of movement from the Western world. We saw the European Union was trying to say, what does it mean for us? We saw a lot of organizations trying to position themselves. Is it Raoul Odinga that's going to take us on that path, ladies and gentlemen? Is it Raoul Odinga? Come on, let's be serious here. We need a technocrat I don't care if it's Kenyan, I don't care if it's Zimbabwe, I don't care if it's South African, I don't care if it's who. We don't need somebody who is supposed to fit into the shoes, who is going there to fit into the shoes of Fakima, because he did nothing, completely nothing. It's a failed regime. We need to go away from those kind of politicizing the chairperson of the African Union. We need technocrats, people who can go there and shake the ground running. That is the approach we need to take, Clarice.
Okay, thank you so much.
Clarice, can I make a comment on that one, please?
Of course, Professor Monda, you can.
So two things to that, you know, you know, I think, as Donald Rumsfeld once said, you know, you go to war with an army you have. You go to war with the army you have, not the one you wish for. So as much as we have these aspirations of having a technocrat to lead the AU, we have a dysfunctional African Union right now. We have to deal with what we have. We have a bicycle. A bicycle cannot become a Mercedes-Benz overnight. So this is a reality. Of course, we all aspire to have a visionary, a technocrat, but that technocrat really needs to have the networking and the personal relationships to push these reforms through. And whether you like Raila Odinga or not, or if it was any other candidate from Djibouti, Mohamed Yusuf, you know, a lot of African relationships, a lot of these diplomatic relationships are not necessarily formed through legal paperwork or resolutions. They're really established through personal relationships, that a candidate knows Denis Sassou Nguesso, a candidate knows Samia Suluhu, a candidate knows Ouattara, you know, and you can criticize that as much as you like, but this is the reality of what we have. This is the AU we have, and we have to deal with that. So I think that's an important element to emphasize, right? We have to be realistic about what we have and match that with our aspirations. You can't aspire to propel yourself to the sun when you don't have the rockets that can even take you to the moon. You have to be realistic about where you want to go. I think that's the first point. I think my second point is this, that even if you decide that you know, the candidate is Raila Odinga, there's a lot of reasons why Raila was nominated by Kenya, and I think one of the big elements of that is the domestic politics. So President Ruto knows that Raila Odinga will be his biggest challenge for the next election in 2027. So a way of eliminating that threat or that domestic challenge to President Ruto's election is to have Raila Odinga as the chair of the Africa Union Commission. That way, the opposition will have a much weaker pool of candidates that can challenge President Ruto come the next election. So his nomination to the AU post is a question of continental diplomacy. But I'm also adding that there's a lot of local politics in Kenya that plays into that. Absolutely. That the fact that the government would rather have Raila in Addis Ababa tied up in diplomatic, niceties and diplomatic red tape, and not able to speak on the politics of Kenya. And that will give President Ruto a much better chance of winning the next election. So I think those are the my two major points. That number one, the AU is dysfunctional, it's weak, and it emphasizes a lot on personal relationships between heads of state. Raila Odinga knows most of them. Number two element of that is this networking in and of itself is not necessarily bad. You cannot change a dysfunctional institution of heads of state who are very jealous about their individual sovereignties. You can't change that overnight. You can't have radical change. It needs to be measured, it needs to be done tactfully or intelligently, or it will go nowhere. And then the third element is this question of the local dynamics of Raila Odinga being nominated. There's a lot of domestic politics around that. Okay. That by the government having the main opposition leader in an AU position will weaken the opposition in Kenya and allow President Ruto to have a much better chance of winning in 2027. But again, that is also still to be seen, because right now, domestically, he's having a lot of internal problems with taxation and corruption and so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
Clarice, I just plead for I know I've not been here because of connection. Give me 2 minutes to respond to my colleague. It's very, very important. Okay. Let me say this.
Dr. Elijah?
My colleague from Kenya, I respectfully understand what you're saying. But with due respect, sir, Africa cannot be sacrificed on the altar of political internal pacification. That is one of the things that is pulling us down in Africa. Dr. Ruto cannot sacrifice Africa on the altar of political internal pacification, because exactly that's what I was alluding to, and you just confirmed it here. That William Ruto is, standing in Raila Odinga because he wants to avoid opposition from within. That is sacrificing Africa on the altar of political pacification in Kenya, and we should say no and no to that. Kenya has much more brighter young men, brighter young women that can stand toe-to-toe in the Western world and bring Africa out of the doldrum. So I totally, respectfully disagree with that approach from William Ruto. Number two, you said Africa is dysfunctional and you have to go to war with the tools that you have. Sir, I disagree completely, respectfully so. Reason being that Africa has a lot of bright young people. Saying that that is what we have right now, you're simply trying to say that we don't have what it takes. We don't have the people that it takes. Check us out the door. No. I'll give you an example. I mentioned the South African firebrand Julius Malema. When he came to the parliamentary group, he did not even have a leadership position within that group, but he saw the lukewarm attitude, he saw the bureaucracy, he saw the procedural issues that were happening there, he saw the anarchy that was happening within the African parliamentary group. That young man shook that organization to the core. As we speak now, the hegemony that France was having because of the large percentage of Francophone countries within that group has been dismantled, because he already dismantled that. He pointed out outside there, and France was able to back out. The Francophonie, for example, that was having a stronghold on that organization was weakened. That is what we are talking about. What about Dr. Arikane? That woman who was supposed to take over, he was being lampooned by all these oligarchs. He has been chased away, but that was someone who was carrying out the flag of African Union in the Western world here. So I disagree respectfully with you, sir, that Africa does not have the people that it takes. And on the third point, yes, we need someone that has relationship that can be a relationship. But the kind of relationship we are talking about, you're talking about oligarchs, you're talking about sit-tight president, you're talking about people who will rather negotiate with the membership or the leadership of African Union and continue to say sit tight or sit tight on their presidency. I do not want to relinquish power. But if you bring a young man there, for example, I want to tell you something that happens in the preamble of the African Union.
Please.
When they were discussing this issue of, African Union should have a stand on these presidents that do not want to give up power, they want to be there forever. Do you know what happened? What happened is that the presidents of these countries that were sitting tight, that do not want to give power, they went into some sort of a negotiation with the chairperson or the leadership of African Union that says that if you change the constitution within 6 months to your election, the African Union should condemn it. But if you change the constitution 1 year before an election, the African Union should not condemn it. They gave a loophole to these guys, and that's why the African Union is so quiet. People are changing constitution, they want to remain there forever, nothing is happening, and you're telling me that this is a kind of a relationship that the chairperson of the African Union should be building with sit-tight president. Sir, I respectfully disagree with that. So I think I still maintain my point. We need radical change. We need somebody who can come there, shape the organization, change things, and let things go in the right direction. That is my approach to this.
It's about having a new and intentional African Union. Professor LAEED, we want to look at this, the framework of the African Union and how the bureaucracy and, of course, how things are being done. We quite notice that, according to the dictates of the African Union Commission, the chair must be a male, and then the assistant or the deputy a female leader. Let's try to address the gender factor in the choosing the candidate of the African Union, and also if it is imperative to not look at the political maneuver, but rather put an African agenda at the fore before deciding who takes the helm of the African Union Commission.
Yes, you are right, Clarice. I think just noting one element regarding this issue of Raila Odinga, whether they go for radical change or just reform. Let's go in between. I mean, we cannot make a revolution anymore. I think what we should do, just revisit African Union values and principles. In other words, by electing a strong charisma person with enough experience. As a matter of fact, Raila Odinga is 79 years old. It's almost 80. So I think he has enough wisdom, enough common sense, enough experience to understand and to drive African Union to the best and sure. Having said that, I think what we should do right now, we should just rely on ourselves. As I said earlier and earlier, African continent is rich of its potential, human potential, as well as natural resources. Why don't we just negotiate and implement what have we been decided, whether it comes to, of course, Continental Free Trade Association or any other regional agreement. I think what we need, African, is someone who is come here to unite them and to get some kind of some collective discussion and talk to each other and reconsider the continent as for the interest of the 55 countries and for 1.4 billion inhabitants. So now the issue of leadership is there. And I'm not anticipating on who will be. As we said already, there are 4 contenders. Whether I would say on rational or on logical terms, Kenya is supposed to be elected because of its political and economic and financial weight in Eastern countries, in Eastern Africa, I would say. So, having said that, the vote will be there. And I don't like to speak in terms of Francophone, Anglophone, or from Portuguese. No, this should be outside the discussion, because what is urgent for Africa now is how to unite, how to speak on one voice in the world affairs, how to regain, how to reconquer its dignity, its political and economic independence. That's most important thing. I know the African countries are facing a lot of problems, regional and conflict and strife and so forth. But a strong leader in Addis Ababa will be a good an extra and added value. I don't have to forget that we have also the election of a deputy, and to my knowledge there are 3 ladies. That's maybe it makes good at least to get gender equality between women and man. I think we have one from Egypt, another from Algeria, and the third from Morocco. So again, here we want to have a lady who will be playing I would say who will be there to stabilize or to help the chairman, to provide him the wisdom, to provide him the common sense, to provide him the diplomatic impetus, the kindness, gentleman manner. So I'm confident that the contribution of a woman, a lady within the African leadership will be an important asset. So overall, I think what we need, we should stop from asking for aid and for help from outside the continent. We should secure our own financial independence. This is the key issue. This is the key policy that the new chairman, the new incumbent in Addis Ababa in the leadership seat should look after. Then things will then he has just to revisit it, as I said, to revisit the African Union chart and principles, and we have not to be biased towards this region or towards this language or towards these people, but towards uniting Africa as a whole.
To face the adversities which are being embedded in along geopolitical lines. Let me come back to you, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU. When we listen to the points which have been advocated so far by you and your colleagues, we come to a seeming conclusion that the more internal strife Africa has, the more it feels at the international level. So now, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, I would love that you address critically on how Africa can solve some of these internal strife to be able to capitalize its position or maybe cement its position at the global level in the times of shifting alliances.
Okay, Clarice, before I answer your question, let me just go a little bit to the question you asked my colleagues in Algeria, if I remember very well. You see, some of these archaic rules in the African Union is a kind of a male chauvinistic rule that want to prevent women that can actually lead Africa. That was the case with Arikana Chiambura K. When these people saw that this woman was coming to bring change, he was exposing a lot of things that were happening in the African Union, they gang up against her and said this and said all kinds of things. But we know what was happening in the African Union at that time. So that is the problem with these guys. Anybody within the African Union that seems to be, progressive in their ideas, that does not want to follow the status quo, that challenges the conservative, male chauvinistic attitude within the African Union, you're going to be fought against. And they were supporting Russia and so on. They were not able to speak. It wasn't because of any internal strife. It is because these countries have already formed a lot of alliances and dependencies with some of these Western countries in such a way that it is difficult for them to step on their toes or go against some of their policies. So they just have to toe the line.